Freedom fighters, freedom lovers, and those who just want stuff for free. Greetings and hello. It is I, your favorite obscure social studies teacher, with just above average looks, intelligence, and style, Mr. Palumbo, and this is the Professor Liberty Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, folks. I always appreciate it. Through the cold, through the rain, through the joy, through the pain, you guys faithfully tune in to hear the ramblings of some guy telling stories just like your weird uncle at the Christmas party. If you'd like to email the show, the email is professorliberty1776@gmail.com. That's professorliberty1776@gmail.com. Send me your questions, your comments, your receipts, your recipes, your desires, your regrets, your recommendations, your ruminations, whatever. You just have to send it to professorliberty1776@gmail.com.
Today we're traveling back to the early 1800s, to a log cabin in the rugged frontier of Kentucky, as we dive into the early life of none other than the 16th President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. Before the White House, before the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, before the legend, there was a boy born into the harsh, unforgiving frontier of early 19th century America. Abraham Lincoln was born on February 12, 1809, in a one-room log cabin on the Sinking Spring Farm near Hodgenville, Kentucky. His parents, Thomas and Nancy Hanks Lincoln, were farmers, working hard, living simply. They weren't illiterate, but education was minimal. Lincoln later said that his early schooling, if put together, would not amount to a year. And yet he read. Oh, did he read? By the age of 10, Abraham had devoured the few books he could get his hands on: the Bible, Aesop's Fables, Robinson Crusoe, and later, the Life of George Washington. He read them over and over, often by firelight, after long days of manual labor. These books shaped his values: justice, perseverance, honesty. Some even say that Aesop's moral tales planted the early seeds of the rhetorical power he'd wield decades later. But Lincoln's childhood wasn't just hard, it was marked by loss. When he was only 9 years old, his mother, Nancy, died of what they called milk sickness, a mysterious illness caused by drinking milk from cows that had grazed on white snakeroot, a wild herb native to North America, particularly found in woodlands and meadows. Her death devastated young Abe, who later said that much of his character came from her. His father remarried a year later to Sarah Bush Johnston, a widow from Kentucky, and by all accounts she was kind and supportive of young Abraham. In 1816, the Lincolns moved to southern Indiana. Why? Land disputes. Thomas Lincoln lost much of his Kentucky land due to poor surveying and unclear titles, one of the many realities of frontier life. Indiana promised fresh opportunities and clearer ownership, so the family packed up, cut a clearing in the forest, and began again. Yet Kentucky possessed another defining characteristic, one absent in Indiana, where Lincoln would later move: the institution of slavery. Although the Lincoln family did not own slaves, Abraham grew up surrounded by it. He observed enslaved people working fields, maintaining homes, and enduring the conditions imposed by their owners. Decades later, he recalled a specific memory of witnessing enslaved individuals chained together and whipped, a sight so profoundly disturbing it remained with him, described in his own words as a continual torment. These were Lincoln's formative encounters with the brutal nature of slavery, and while it might be tempting to imagine a fully formed abolitionist emerging from these early experiences, the reality was more gradual. Lincoln observed, absorbed, and questioned. The seeds of moral opposition were planted, developing over time, shaped by his childhood observations and later experiences. Young Abraham helped clear the land, split rails for fences, and planted corn. He was known for his towering height and impressive strength even as a teenager, 6 feet tall by 17. This is a way of saying at the tender age of 17, young Abe was a towering 6 feet in height. As a tall, strong teenager in southern Indiana, Lincoln earned a reputation for physical strength and often engaged in informal wrestling matches, common among frontier boys. These contests were more like roughhouse brawls, combining grappling with brute force. Later in life, his law partner William Herndon is quoted as saying about Lincoln's strength, "He could lift with ease a barrel of flour to his shoulders. He was a match for any man in a fight and was always good-natured about it." Even as a young man, Lincoln was prone to deep melancholy, what we might call in today's terminology, depression. He was often solemn, even gloomy, and sometimes wrote poetry about death and sadness. Despite his melancholy, Lincoln had a sharp, sometimes dark sense of humor. He told odd, backwoods-style jokes and long-winded stories full of metaphors and punchlines. Not everyone got his style, but more than anything, he stood out because of his mind. He'd walk miles just to borrow a book. He practiced writing in the margins of wood shavings and the backs of old boards. His neighbors thought he was odd, too quiet, too thoughtful for a frontier boy. And that, perhaps, is where the roots of Lincoln's greatness truly lie, in the tension between manual labor and intellectual hunger. He worked with his hands, but he dreamed with his mind. He knew hardship, and that hardship instilled empathy. It's easy to forget that Lincoln wasn't born into power. He carved his way into history, swing by swing, page by page. A pivotal experience occurred when Lincoln was about 19 years old. He was hired, along with a friend, to pilot a flatboat carrying produce down the Mississippi River to New Orleans. This journey involved hard, dangerous work, navigating the river, managing cargo, and guarding against potential threats. The destination, however, proved more impactful than the journey. In New Orleans, the heart of the Deep South, Abraham Lincoln witnessed a large-scale slave market for the first time. The scene involved human beings inspected, bought, and sold, families forcibly separated, individuals shackled and treated as property. The cold commercial reality of the institution was starkly visible. Accounts from those who knew him later confirmed the profound and lasting impact of this experience. According to one report, Lincoln remarked to his companion, "If I ever get a chance to hit that thing, I'll hit it hard." Was this the precise moment his political destiny was sealed? Probably not. But it represented a significant moral awakening, reinforcing the convictions forming since his youth in Kentucky. The horror observed in New Orleans solidified his opposition to the institution. It's vital, however, to understand that Lincoln's journey regarding race and slavery was one of profound evolution. The man elected to the Illinois legislature in 1834 was still developing the convictions that would later lead him to champion emancipation. His early political stance reflected both a deep personal moral unease, rooted in the injustices he'd witnessed since childhood in Kentucky and New Orleans, and the complex political realities of his era. Early in his public career, he did not advocate for immediate nationwide abolition of slavery, a position that would have been seen as too radical by many and certainly politically perilous. Instead, he consistently opposed the expansion of slavery into new Western territories. This was a crucial battleground in the antebellum period. While stopping short of demanding an end to slavery where it already existed, opposing expansion was a direct challenge to the interests of slaveholding states and aimed to contain the institution, preventing its growth and political power from overwhelming the nation. It was a stance grounded in the belief, shared by many Whigs and later Republicans, that limiting slavery might set it on a course for eventual, albeit distant, extinction. In his early 20s, Lincoln established himself in New Salem, Illinois. He undertook various jobs, store clerk, postmaster, surveyor, while diligently pursuing legal studies in his spare time, borrowing law books whenever possible. He cultivated a reputation for integrity, laying the groundwork for the moniker Honest Abe. He briefly participated in the Black Hawk War. Though he saw little combat, his fellow volunteers elected him captain, recognizing his leadership qualities and trustworthiness rather than any military expertise. At the age of 23, Abraham Lincoln first turned to politics. In 1832, he ran for the Illinois state legislature, but his bid ended in defeat. Undeterred, he dove deeper into his studies, particularly Blackstone's commentaries, refining his legal knowledge. 2 years later, in 1834, Lincoln ran again for the state legislature, and this time he won. His political career was officially launched. Lincoln entered politics as a Whig, a political party that had become a major force in American politics during the 1820s and 1830s. The Whigs emerged in response to President Andrew Jackson and his democratic policies. Jackson's strong stance on states' rights and his opposition to the national bank drove various groups, former Federalists, National Republicans, who had supported John Quincy Adams and Henry Clay, and even some disillusioned Democrats, to unite into a new political movement. Much like the Federalists before them, the Whigs championed modernization, economic development, and internal improvements such as roads, canals, and railroads. They believed that federal action could help propel the nation forward. While the Whigs supported economic progress, they were also divided over the issue of slavery, particularly in the northern states. As the slavery debate intensified, the Whig Party began to fracture. By the early 1850s, these divisions, coupled with the party's broader ideological shifts, led to its collapse. Many Northern Whigs joined the newly formed Republican Party, which united around the goal of preventing the spread of slavery into new territories. This fragmentation of the Whigs came at a time when Lincoln's own political views were evolving as well. In 1837, Lincoln made his first significant public stand against slavery when he and a colleague issued a protest against a pro-slavery resolution in the Illinois state legislature. In the protest, he made it clear that he believed slavery was morally wrong and that the federal government should prevent its expansion. He stated, "The institution of slavery is founded on both injustice and bad policy." At the time, Lincoln also believed that the Constitution tied the hands of Congress when it came to abolishing slavery in states where it already existed, and so he refrained from calling for immediate abolition. In short, he hated slavery, but believed that the government had limited power in addressing it where it already existed. This may sound tame today, but in 1837 Illinois, it was a bold stance, especially from a young, rising politician. The protest also made clear that Lincoln believed the federal government didn't have the power to abolish slavery where it already existed. In short, he hated slavery, but he believed the Constitution tied the hands of Congress. So what changed? In the 1840s and 1850s, Lincoln continued to build his legal career and served a term in Congress. During this time, he criticized the Mexican-American War, seeing it as an attempt to expand slavery into new territories. But it was the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 which allowed new territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery that truly marked a turning point. The law effectively repealed the Missouri Compromise and threw the nation deeper into the slavery debate. Lincoln was furious. No longer willing to accept slavery's expansion, he returned to politics, not as a Whig, for the party was disintegrating, but as part of the rising Republican Party. In his Peoria speech of 1854, Lincoln made his views crystal clear, blending moral, legal, and historical arguments against slavery. He famously stated, Slavery is founded in the selfishness of man's nature. Opposition to it is in his love of justice. Lincoln wasn't calling for immediate abolition. He still believed the Constitution limited the federal government's power over slavery where it already existed, but he was adamant slavery was wrong and it was the nation's duty to stop its spread. This speech marked the beginning of Lincoln's transformation from a frontier lawyer and rising politician to the moral leader we remember today. His ability to navigate the Constitution with one hand and the nation's moral conscience with the other would define his presidency. So when people say that Lincoln evolved on slavery, they're right. But it wasn't a sudden shift. It was more like the gradual rise of a tide shaped by his growing political experience, personal observations, and deep moral reflection. And that tide would only continue to rise. Abraham Lincoln's journey from a humble frontier life to the White House was shaped by the lessons he learned from his early struggles and experiences. Growing up on the rugged Illinois frontier, Lincoln faced hardship, self-reliance, and a fierce work ethic that would serve him well throughout his life. His exposure to the moral complexities of slavery during his law practice, along with his lifelong love for reading, fueled a deep intellectual curiosity that set him apart from many of his contemporaries. Lincoln's evolution from a young, uncertain politician to a national leader was marked by his unyielding commitment to justice and the preservation of the Union. His remarkable ability to balance the pragmatics of law and governance with a profound sense of moral clarity eventually propelled him to the highest office in the land. When Lincoln became the Republican Party's candidate in 1860, it was not just his legal acumen or political skill that defined him. It was the culmination of his life experiences on the frontier, his intellectual development, and his unwavering stand against the expansion of slavery, all of which would make him one of the most consequential figures in American history. Here at Professor Liberty, we seek to educate, inspire, and restore. If you like this podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts and give me a 5-star rating. You could do me an even better by submitting a written review. Please go to teacherspaidteachers.com for any activities, worksheets, and other educational materials you can use for your classroom or homeschool needs. If you haven't already, please follow us on Facebook and on X. Until next time, go throughout the land and proclaim liberty.